Welcome, everybody. We're glad that you could join us today. I want to welcome you to one of our first administrator panels. I'm Karen Vignari, and I'm joined by Kathy Johnson and Rick Miranda, who you will hear more from in a short time. But the purpose of this webinar series is to engage you in the conversation around scaling adaptive courseware student success. The work of our unit as a member of Every Learner, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, actually started before the Every Learner Everywhere network began. The Personalized Learning Consortium was started here at APLU in 2014, and we have been, our mission is really about using the technologies effectively to promote student success. The focus of our work has been around two areas. Primarily, we are been working with adaptive courseware tools, and then secondarily, we have been privileged to be working also with improving advising. And our work continues as we've moved into being part of a great network, Every Learner Everywhere. In this instance, we will be talking to two provosts who, one has worked with us very closely with a grant that we were awarded from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That grant started in 2016. The second provost, Kathy Johnson, will also be talking to us about some of the work that she did with the Association of Chief Academic Officers in receiving a digital fellows grant. We work very closely, ACAO and APLU, but now as part of this network, we work with even more organizations. So the Every Learner Everywhere network was started also in 2017. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation brought together previous grantees that were focused on using digital learning for improvement in student success, both for non-traditional, for first generation, for low income, and students of color. That mission, that equity mission, continues to drive Every Learner Everywhere. We are very focused in not only using technologies, but improving teaching overall. And what that means to us is that we are thinking about the technologies as a tool both for the student and for the faculty. The faculty get to not only integrate the tool, but they also have an increasing amount of data that they can begin to assess a student with, to make sure that the student stays on track. Before I switch over and introduce our panelists, I do want to give you a little bit of information about the APLU grants. We have well over 150,000 enrollments. So we're beginning to see not only some trends, we also have a little bit of research data that we can share. We are continuing to digest that research data as our universities will report to us another full year of data collection on January 31st of this year. But our top enrollments, we can tell you, have been mostly around science, but we're particularly pleased to note that we've also got some humanities, including a couple of writing courses. Before I can give you the analysis of our January 31 data, I do want to share with you what we have learned thus far. Is that so far we're seeing improved overall performance when you look at the content areas of math, biology, business, and physics are all showing positive and small effect sizes year over year when you look at the use of courseware being included. The cumulative results, if we look at non-adaptive courseware versus adaptive courseware, what we see is the improvement, that is the student success rates, when we think about pass rates, are actually improving faster. The slope of that graph goes up faster than when we don't have academic courseware. So what I want to say is we still see that many of our universities are improving student success without adaptive courseware, but that success rate actually increases when you add in adaptive courseware and you implement that well. And this is actually comparable to the data that was reported in the Next Generation Courseware report that was released December of 2019. And then our institutions are reporting some incredible results from student savings. And what I mean by student savings in this case is that we are seeing more students successfully complete a course, therefore not having to repeat a course, and being on schedule then to continue to graduate on time. This is being reported at least 3 of our institutions. We are beginning to see that our institutions are also reporting, in some cases, deeper learning. And the deeper learning is measured by pre and post test, having used the same pre and post in previous years before they added the adaptive. We're also seeing that our students are particularly savvy. And what I mean by that is they appreciate the use of adaptive courseware in that it helps them as long as it is an important part of the course. And what we mean by that is typically it is a part of the grade, and often a substantial part of the grade, between 15 and 25%, but in some cases it's as high as 40%. And that the students recognize it supports their other assessments, right? So the third part of that is that the faculty actually refer to the work that they do inside of the courseware as an element of the other parts of the course. And we're really pleased to see some of our focus around when you consider all of the courses in the courseware, not every course performs as well as others, but some of our colleagues, and I'll just point out one that isn't on this particular call, at Northern Arizona University, we are seeing that if they include all their adaptive courses, that those adaptive courses are actually reporting a 5% increase in student success. So there's a lot of positive. Now, this remains very hard work. It remains very important that we include in this work the leaders and the leadership of those institutions, which is why I'm so pleased to have both Kathy and Rick. So Rick, I want to give you a little chance to talk a little bit about just who Colorado State is, your work with both the adaptive learning and your work around particularly improving student success in your first year gateway types of courses.
Hi all, yeah, I'm Rick Miranda. I'm the Provost and Executive Vice President at Colorado State University. We're a land grant university here in Colorado, the land grant university. We have about 28,000 students, probably about 23 or 4,000 of them are undergraduates. We have a comprehensive array of programs for R1 University, and we have a long interest in improving teaching and student success, as we all do, and with new technologies, educational technologies as well. So we have a unit which we call TILT here. TILT stands for the Institute for Learning and Teaching. It's been in place now for about 10 years. And our adaptive courseware efforts have been driven through that unit. It's a little bit of a whimsical name for it, but it just barely beat out the Undergraduate Learning Institute, which was going to be even more whimsical as an acronym for our teaching center. So our director of that center, Gwen Gorzelski, has been working closely with Karen and the rest of the consortium on the adaptive part. But I do want to say that the adaptive results we're getting are part of a strategy, a more comprehensive strategy in increasing the uptake of instructional best practices across the institution, and especially in the lower division and gateway courses.
Thank you, Rick. That's extremely helpful as an overview of why Colorado State University is interested in this work. Kathy, if I could turn to you, Kathy Johnson, and talk a little bit about why, this is going to be the hard one, right? You have the acronym as a name of IUPUI. So if you could first tell people what that means, and second, tell us why you've gotten interested in this work and how you're seeing it flesh out at your campus.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So hi everyone, my name is Kathy Johnson and I currently serve as the Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at IUPUI. IUPUI, it's a palindrome. It's also the largest name for a higher education institution according to Jeopardy, but it stands for Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. And when you hear me say that, you know why we tend toward the acronym version. But what that campus is it's a core campus of Indiana University. There's a flagship in Bloomington, and then we are the urban public research intensive university that's located in the state capital. And I think unlike some other large cities, we really are the principal institution of higher education. It's we, and then we have a very large community college system and several privates. So with that comes, I think, a huge responsibility to think very broadly about student success across all that we do. We have a total of 30,000 students. About 21,000 of those are undergraduates. The remainder are graduate and professional. We have a very strong health and life science focus here. But of those undergraduates, about a third of them are students of color. And we've seen that percentage increase over time. We also have a very high percentage of students who are eligible for Pell Grants, students who are first generation or the first in their families to go to school. And so that mix, I think, really attunes us to thinking very systemically about ways that we can eliminate equity gaps. I actually entered into my role, I've been doing this for about 5 years, but before this, I served as the leader for undergraduate education at IUPUI. And I think that was the perfect primer, if you will, for moving into my current position, because I understood really well how we can attack this issue from the support services side. You know, we can invest in advising. There's all sorts of fancy technologies that we can use. We can restructure, we can create programs. But as our success at retaining students plateaued, it became increasingly clear to me that the next frontier had to be the classroom, and it had to involve really kind of blowing up what we were doing for standard faculty development support and trying to reconstruct that in a very intentional way, again, to address these issues of inequities, but also to ensure that faculty were able to try new ways of teaching without fear of that innovation perhaps having a backlash in terms of how we review them for their teaching. So I actually love being in the role that I'm in, and I think we'll talk about this more over time. I just think that people in provost type positions have the opportunity to connect lots of things together that enables us to hopefully deploy initiatives such as this well.
That's perfect, and it leads me right to my next and my first question, I should say, we are very interested both at the Every Learner Everywhere and at APLU in figuring out what is the role of the provost and senior leadership and the staff that work for you in really thinking about improving teaching in those first experience courses, right? I mean, sometimes we often refer to those as gateway and foundational, but I also think we have to think broadly across our universities is if maybe, and IUPUI might be one, and I know, Rick, you also have transfer students, right? We have to think about what are those first experiences. So while much of our grant work has been working with quote unquote freshmen, we know they're not all freshmen in the courses. So when you think about the provost role, I guess what I'm also asking is the approach to that. And Kathy, I appreciate how you introduced this work, because to me, one of the things that I think has happened is we've had a incredible amount of faculty willing to do innovation in their particular class, but we haven't had a lot of success at doing innovation across a course with all the sections of the course. So there's two parts to this question. It really is, what's the role of the provost, particularly around sort of focusing on scale and those first experience courses? So I'm happy to hand it off to either of you, and hopefully both of you will respond.
Well, I might start. I mean, I think, you know, the role of the provost, first of all, I completely agree with Kathy that the ability for folks in this office to be an effective connector across campus in enabling folks in different units to take advantage of each other's expertise when they initially might not even know they exist is critical. And I think that's one of the fundamental roles at the Provost office. Another role, and tacking back to the leadership piece, I think, is to make sure that campus realizes that instructional effectiveness is one of the primary institutional values, and that we're constantly wanting our faculty to participate in getting better at that. So no matter what that means in their particular instructional roles. And so making sure that we have the right incentives in place, making sure that we use the bully pulpit of the Provost's office to remind both department chairs and faculty and deans that this is an institutional imperative, and to place, to make sure that we have the incentives right in the evaluation mechanisms of faculty and of departments, by the way, because departments do get evaluated as well in regular program reviews and other ways. So these are all sort of top of the head initial ways in which the Provost's office gets involved in these kinds of activities. It sort of doesn't really fall to the Provost's office to dive down into a particular department in a particular course and saying thou shalt use adaptive courseware for this experience. That doesn't tend to work so well. Although we can talk a little later about when that might work better than, or when you might identify the likely willing faculty partners and departments as candidates for taking up these initiatives.
Yeah. I'll just layer a little bit onto that. I love Rick's answer, and it's hard to add much, but I'll just say that I think in terms of thinking about institutional organizational structures, I think that it's probably easiest for someone in the chief academic officer or provost role to launch new structural imperatives, if you will. So you can create things like university college structures. You could actually form a gateway program. We call ours Gateway to Graduation. You can make sure that those structures have very strong support from institutional research and people who can do program evaluation. I do think that one of the things that faculty are very compelled by is good data. And so I think it's really, really imperative for people in our roles to constantly be lifting up data and sort of making empirically based arguments for why we need to move in a direction or switch gears. I also think that there's tremendous work that can be done in helping deans and chairs and perhaps associate deans to understand deeply the importance of this work, because they're the ones who are going to really hold their faculty accountable. You know, I'm too far removed, except I do still try to teach in my own department once in a while, but in general, I'm just way too distant from being able to talk to faculty about how they do their work. But I can ask deans hard questions every year about what they're doing to incentivize, to reward, to shine a spotlight on work like this that happens in their school. And I think that there's the promotion and tenure process. Again, I don't create criteria or standards, but what I can do is assure faculty that trying new things will not be held against you. In fact, we want to see a willingness to take risks, a willingness, as Rick put it, to kind of continuously improve professionally in the area of teaching. And so there is a really important bully pulpit around that work, because I think many faculty are kind of concerned about that evaluation process. And if we can assure them that there aren't going to be, again, penalties down the road by, you know, trying something that doesn't work as well the first time, that's important. Finally, the only other thing I'll add is that most of us, I think, have centers for teaching and learning or the equivalent in our portfolio. And so there's opportunities to think very carefully about how those are structured, how they are made accessible, maybe to faculty who teach part-time or at a distance. I just think that there's, again, some sort of systemic thinking that can be done around ways of ensuring there's equity among faculty to the supports that can help them to do a better job in this area.
And I really appreciate it. No, Rick, go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about the promotion and tenure aspects of this work, and how we've tried to make sure that faculty are given every chance to present evidence of teaching effectiveness, including the use of instructional best practices, whatever they are, and educational technologies is one of them. I was going to mention that we have sort of a happy coincidence in this moment in history, because at least on our campus, and I think this is true around the country, we are undergoing a major reform of how we treat our non-tenure track faculty, most of whom are engaged in the teaching mission primarily. So we've, in upgrading their status and in providing promotion pathways and professional development for them, we have had to, as an institution, undertake an initiative whereby we list very carefully all of the ways in which that population can present evidence in their teaching effectiveness. This, I think, is, we've just finished that last year. We're starting to take this month, in fact, dossiers for promotion of non-tenure track faculty. This will redound to the benefit of the tenure track faculty as well, because these expectations for teaching effectiveness are written for all faculty. In fact, they're not singled out to the non-tenure track faculty. So I think it's, we're in a moment where we're able to kind of stiffen the expectations and the ability to present evidence of teaching effectiveness in a much broader way, in a much more effective way across the academy.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful to hear. And I sort of, my follow-up question, you guys have already started to talk about, is a little bit about, you know, promoting the change in teaching practices. What are the institutional and organizational changes that really support that? But what I'd like you to focus on just a little bit more, because I think the audience heard a lot of great ideas, is this idea around those gateway, around the cooperative and collaborative work, right? Like, it is important to hear that a single non-tenured professor could actually get tenure or go through a promotion process because they're working very hard at teaching. But how do we make that a collaborative event? And what kinds of things have you done to promote that. And I hope the audience recognizes that we're not saying every single professor will do exactly the same thing. That's not the point, but we need to hold all of us, and Kathy, I think you referenced this a little bit, we need to hold ourselves accountable for the performance across these first experience courses, because they're so critical to our students' success, and mostly, and even more so, I should say, critical to our students who fall in equity populations that haven't been as successful before. So if you could take us just a little bit deeper into both the kinds of things that you've done and helped set up on the campus, but also across that collaborative work that needs to be done.
Kathy, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the Gateway to Graduation program that I mentioned. So we actually do bring course coordinators of large Gateway courses together regularly for meetings to share best practices, to share data. Actually, they use their own internal resources to generate their own reports every year. They're very aware of what each other's DWF rates are and how those change over time. We invest in the program. It has a budget for programming. They usually bring in speakers, host retreats, but probably the most impactful thing that they do is they sponsor faculty communities of practice around various topics or themes, which I think it gets a little bit at your question about collaboration, Karen. So for using adaptive learning technologies or personalized learning tools, you don't have to just be with people from your own discipline. Great learning can occur when people are put together with broader swaths of the academy. And that has been a very, I think, successful model. We usually invest in stipends for people who are part of those communities of practice, and we hold them accountable in that we usually hold back some of that stipend until they've transformed a course or done whatever project that they join the community to do. And then probably the most important thing I try to do is, again, I surround that with really good program evaluation capacity and IR infrastructure so that people aren't out there in a vacuum. They're not having to worry about that aspect of the work. We take care of that for them so that they can really just focus on what they're going to do differently in their Gateway course. The last thing that I'll say is that we've learned how important it is to have strong leadership for programs like this. So it's always had historically actually non-tenure track faculty as directors of sorts who really do, I think, inspire their colleagues and their peers through messages on listservs. I'm actually on that listserv, so I see how frequently they kind of lift up each other for doing cool things in the classroom.
That's fabulous.
What I'd say is that we have a very heterogeneous set of departments who are approaching the delivery of their Gateway courses. We're not as organized as IUPUI is here at Colorado State in that dimension. So we've had to focus on those departments and those courses that seem amenable to an intervention of this sort. And I wouldn't say that we're looking for a coalition of the willing, but we're looking for a coalition of the open-minded, at least. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to make sure that we're putting resources into those courses and Gateway experiences that the department will meet us halfway and reform the entire course. So some departments, they have 10 sections of a course, but they're taught by 10 different faculty who don't really try that hard to coordinate with each other. They don't have common exams. They may not even have that similar syllabuses. On the other end of the spectrum, we have some courses for which there's a very strong course coordination, either for historical reasons or for reasons that the instructors tend to rotate frequently and the department wants to maintain a lot of control over the syllabus and make sure we have consistency. Those courses where you have a big departmental investment and a leader at the department who's in charge of the course and for whom all of the sections have a certain level of consistency to them, those are the ones that are ripe for reform that will stick. And so we've tried to identify those courses and the faculty there who are open-minded and have conversations with them. Again, the top-down directive from my office doesn't tend to be too effective, but the enunciation of the larger goal and the willingness to have a conversation about what their issues are, bringing in data, as Kathy has indicated, to help convince them that improvements are both possible and would be valued with resources, and make sure the incentives are in place. Those are the tend to be the win-wins for us.
That's fabulous. I did want to say we are very open to audience questions, and I recognize that this is a webinar version, so you will need to type in your chat any Q&A that you have for us. And as I see those questions come up, I will certainly get them addressed by our panelists. I'm going to jump in here a little bit on a little bit deeper on why has sort of the digital, the adaptive courseware been particularly interesting? Why is it that your universities have thought that that might help? And I know I started the conversation by saying some of the data is showing that, but you were willing to do this a couple years ago before we had compelling data. So what is it that, I mean, and I know Rick's team and Kathy, I don't know your team as well, but I know that you've done a lot of great work around high impact practices. I mean, there's very good evidence out there about transforming undergraduate courses, but the digital learning is still a bit new. The adaptive courseware is still a bit new. So why did you feel that this might be a good opportunity for you to introduce, for your universities to work around including this? It's not, and I do want to be clear with the audience, we are, as every learner everywhere, we are not signaling that you only need to add adaptive learning and we'll see success. Adaptive learning is what we consider a valuable tool, but it is never going to be the only thing. We always say technology is never just the answer, right? It always includes other kinds of teaching practices that leverage the technology. So I'd love to hear from our provost on why you thought this might be a compelling add to your arsenal or your activities around teaching and improving teaching and learning.
Well, this is Rick again. I think a couple of things come to mind. First of all, we have a pretty robust online program here. It's about a $50 million business, offering scores of degrees and many, many courses. So there's a lot of faculty who are using online education and are experienced at it. Now, online education is not the same as educational technology and digital learning, but there's an overlap there. And when you're trying to reach students in new ways through your experiences online, I think it opens your mind to considering reaching face-to-face students in some new ways as well. And so we've always had in mind, in our online operation has been very conscious about this, of taking whatever we're doing online and seeing, well, how can we translate that back into the face-to-face experience, either by creating hybrid experiences or other. So I think the faculty, campus was ready and willing to consider these things. At least a lot of faculty were. I think it's also the case that, as you say, adaptive isn't just the only thing we're interested in. We want to make, and I think adaptive is most effective when it's situated inside a larger strategy for increasing faculty's use of and attempt to explore the effectiveness of instructional best practices, whatever those best practices are. So we've had some injection from our CSU Online efforts. We've had a larger strategy of instructional best practices and professional development and instruction. And then I'd say that it's also the case that it just seems to us that it's going to be an inescapable element of all of our futures coming. And we wanted to make sure we were riding the front of the wave rather than swimming furiously from behind to try and catch a wave.
Okay. So I've been doing this for less long than Rick has, but I first jumped in when I responded to a call for proposals. The Association of Chief Academic Officers, or ACAO, that Karen mentioned, had been awarded a grant to basically help people who do the job that I do to understand these tools more deeply. My background actually is in cognitive psychology, so I've always been a student of how people learn, very interested in expertise in artificial intelligence. So I knew about these tools through my own disciplinary background, but I jumped at the opportunity to apply because I thought that my being part of this program could serve as a lever for me to ask some folks on campus to try doing things a little bit differently. I knew, as I mentioned, I used to have responsibility for undergraduate education. I knew that our two biggest student success barriers were money. Never have enough money or aid to close everyone's unmet financial need gap. But the second thing that is a problem is math. And for complicated reasons. In the state of Indiana, there's a lot of variability in terms of students' high school math preparation. Some students actually enter college without having taken math in their senior year of high school. And I learned very quickly that what happens is you forget it fast. And I even have students coming into my institution who have college credit, usually through dual credit, on their transcript, but yet they weren't placing into that course for which they already had credit. So there's been a lot of study of how math is truly, truly a barrier. Students also want to put it off or kick the can down the road a few years, and that makes the whole situation even worse. So I saw this for me as an opportunity to really try to cultivate some champions within the math department. And I have to just say, I won't name names right now, but my colleagues were amazing. There were some full professors that had never really taught undergraduates before that were intrigued by these tools and offered to do a pilot to see how they might work. And so my strategy was to really just concentrate on that department because it's where one of my largest challenges are, and then hopefully use success through that experience, which I called a pilot, of course, to expand the work into other areas.
Yeah, just a couple of quick follow-up. One of the things that we do know is that the math work in adaptive and digital courseware has actually been around for well over a decade. And so that doesn't make it perfect, but we are beginning to see across the board result when it comes to getting started with math. I don't want to leave people with the idea that we're not seeing results but I think math is a critical area, and nationally, and I'm sure our colleague on this presentation, who is a math PhD, would also agree with the sense that across our universities, we recognize math, not only just getting through a course of math, but what it also helps us with in many other subjects, whether that be econ or psychology or continuing courses. So I particularly love the focus on making sure we can improve student success around math, because those logic skills, if I said that right, Rick, really are important to many other courses as well. I don't know, Rick, did you want to add anything as the professor of math?
Maybe I'll just say one word: amen.
Well, that's an important word to say. And the other thing I'd really, and this may be your own work because you are both well-established leaders in this field. And I think it may be, this is too far distance, but Rick, I'm actually going to point back to one of the things that one of your former CIOs, Pat Burns, said to me. The other thing about the adaptive courseware that I think is really important is it's helping students practice, right? And we can sit here and talk about whether textbooks were too expensive or whether they were not being purchased or all of these things. The adaptive courseware is really getting them in to do their work, right? That prep work is critical to having a successful class period for students and for those students and for the faculty. And I don't know if you get to talk to your faculty very much, but how are they sort of responding? Are they seeing a difference in students? Are you hearing that? Or are you guys, as you've already said, several layers removed from the faculty work?
Well, we are definitely seeing more student engagement with the material when adaptive courseware, or even not so adaptive, but just online homeworks and other mechanisms for educational technology are being utilized and are being monitored by the faculty member, and for which the student then gets some credit in the course towards their grade if they participate well in the experience. So this is definitely contributing to student success, I would say. Now, the results that we're getting at Colorado State on just, if you put blinders on and just look at the adaptive courses, we're seeing, of which we've done, I don't know, 300 or 400 sections now over several years. 8 or 10 different disciplines. I think there's 34,000 students who had an experience in one or more courses. I mean, what we're seeing is it's not, it's not a magic bullet, but when it's combined properly with other elements of instructional best practices, such as flipped classrooms or the deployment of learning assistants sensibly in the course, or other elements of instructional innovation, then adaptive becomes really a game changer for us. So.
Yeah, I think that there's a shift, and I have checked in with our colleagues from the math department pretty regularly to see how things continue to go. At first it's unsettling to cede control over, what historically I think there was a lot of lecturing going on in math classes to rather large groups of students. And it felt very weird for them to shift into more of a coaching role with interspersed with little mini lectures, if you will. The other thing that they said was that there still are students who struggle, but it's students who struggle with staying on task and engaging with the practice. And I think that's another dimension of instruction skill. I mean, most of us are taught how to teach in our disciplines, but we don't really think about ways of motivating students. So what they've found is that students who are very hardworking, who can manage to carve out time to engage with the tools, they probably do way better than they would have had in a more traditional lecture class. But there still are some students who either don't have the ability to stay engaged because of life commitments, work, family, and so on, or they just aren't sufficiently self-regulated to kind of diligently stick with the work. Those are still the students that they're having trouble reaching. But on balance, the performance has gone way up.
And just as to share with our audience, I mean, one of the things that we have hoped for, but I don't think we've learned enough yet about this adaptive work, is that because we're getting a stream of data earlier, our hope is we can figure out ways as institutions, starting with the faculty, to be able to reach out to those students who are not actually showing any data in these systems, right? We know this, and Rick, you've already mentioned Colorado State's great online division. We know this from online learning. If we don't get you logged into the system and quote unquote working, we are losing that student really quickly. And unfortunately, with our past, we weren't able to actually assess that often until there was a midterm, or maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks in, there was a serious assessment. The idea that we're catching this earlier, I don't think we have the answer for it, but it's really promising. I wonder if you could just share with the audience the work that you guys have already done around student success, and how you would think about adding in, as you both talked about. The fact is, student success from the advising and lowering the administrative barriers can't go far enough without going into the classroom. But how are you thinking about adding this data into your student success missions?
Yeah, I mean, we have, as one of the cornerstone sort of pillars of our student success initiative, is our First 4 Weeks program, where we have been working with faculty in these gateway courses to enlist their help and and upgrade their awareness of the importance of, you know, early graded feedback and having students be present and engaged in the material early. Because you're right, I mean, it's for students who are at risk already, waiting 5, 6, 7 weeks before the midterm shows up is a disaster. So that's a fundamental pillar of our student success initiative overall. And these adaptive platforms where you are driving the students to engage electronically with something enables us to get a window on whether or not they're engaging with the material at all, which is much more robust than simply the weekly quiz or checking in with a recitation section, a leader, or other sort of much more imperfect mechanisms to try and divine who's on task and who's not.
Yeah. So Indiana University has a tool called the Student Engagement Roster that was actually built in-house that's really intended to accomplish the aims that you've been discussing. We also have an e-text initiative that also provides data to faculty about which students are reading their book, what questions are they asking as they read it. I think what I've struggled with, and this is also true on the advising side as well as the faculty side, we have some interoperability issues. So these are separate systems that don't always take data from each other. So right now the student engagement roster is something that faculty are invited to begin adding information to in the second week of classes. I find, of course, that if students or faculty are using these tools, there's much more data on which they can make their informed recommendations within that roster, but it's not a seamless process yet. So I think that's a direction, hopefully in the future, that will be addressed by some companies, perhaps.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that Kathy's mentioned, in addition to providing faculty a lot of resources in the IR space and these other support mechanisms, I can't overemphasize for this particular initiative of adaptive courseware and educational technology to get the IT folks working closely with the faculty member and with the course designers, if you're using instructional course designers. And that trio of people, faculty for the content expertise, the instructional designers for the design of the course and how to approach students, and the IT person who is able to address the substantive issues of, as Kathy pointed out, interoperability and many other things that come up that form sort of an energy barrier to actually taking up some of these tools. That team needs to work very closely together, and getting the IT folks connected with the initiatives early and often is, and serving as a consultants directly with faculty members, go into their offices, sitting down in front of their computers, and walking them through how it works. This is proved to be one of the most effective tools we have to actually make progress here.
Yeah, Rick, that is such a tremendous point. And I think that leadership helped engage all of those things, as you guys both talked about the connections across your campuses, and getting everybody involved in the student success mission. It's really nice to hear how both of you are trying to bring together both systems and people to support the improvement of student success. I can't say enough for the fact that I think, you know, I am very proud to be here at the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, but I also recognize we've been a very decentralized kind of higher ed, and when we're working on a mission that is important as improving student success, we really need to think across, and I think it takes leaders like yourselves to think about how are we going to bring those resources to bear in a way that they haven't been used well before. So I would like to offer, I mean, I know both of you have been able to share certain things about the programs that you're doing. I'd love for you to share any sort of, and I know Kathy, you said you're only in a pilot stage, but talk a little bit to the audience about sort of what are the success markers? Maybe, and Rick, you have already mentioned not every course is seeing the same kind of success, and we totally understand that, but what are the success markers that you are seeing, and what would you tell others to be expecting as you roll into rolling out some of the adaptive courseware? And I know, Rick, you started off because you're a little further along in this work, so maybe you want to start a little bit with what are the kinds of success markers that Colorado State is seeing right now?
Well, I think one of the fundamental things to pay attention to is to not treat adaptive as some sort of orphan tactic that can be grafted onto your normal course and not paid a lot of attention to. I think if you're going to introduce something like that into the syllabus, it should be very thoughtfully integrated with all of the other things you're doing in that course, and make sure that the work that you're asking students to do in the adaptive realm, in interfacing with the technology, is directly relevant to what's going on in the classroom, how the assessments are happening, how their study groups are being asked to form and around the student learning pieces. So it should be extremely well integrated in order to be effective. If you're just, as I said, grafting it on and bolting it onto the side and not paying a lot of attention to it, and it's not really well integrated to the syllabus, it's not going to be that effective.
Yeah, I think in terms of markers of success, I mean, we're really focusing on what we would traditionally use for just about any student success program. So that would be GPA, performance in the course, one-year retention, on-time graduation, all of those sorts of things. I would, though, add that the faculty have been very adamant that one critical piece of data that they want to see, that I confess I don't have yet for them, is how do students do in subsequent courses that depend on courses that have been modified to include adaptive courseware. Is the learning as deep? Is it as prone to transfer? And this is particularly a concern about majors. So in general, faculty seem fine using these tools for a broad, general education course that involves lots and lots of non-majors, but they start worrying about equivalence of learning a lot more when you're thinking about majors in STEM or majors in a very particular discipline. So I think it falls upon all of us to kind of think longitudinally about tracking student performance that way. The other thing that I'll add is just a false impression that I had at the beginning. I thought it'd be really easy to just count up how many faculty are using these tools and use that as an index of whether we're being successful. And that ends up being very, very challenging. I thought I could do it by looking at which tools had been pulled into Canvas, which is our LMS for the campus. But you really can't tell who's really using those tools. You can sort of get a quick superficial look. So my point is that if you're thinking about gauging the effectiveness of scaling by looking at data on faculty utilization of tools, I found that to be a very hard metric to kind of get at.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kathy. And in the Every Learner network, there is an organization called Titan Partners, and they produce something called a Time for Class survey. And we're still finding only about in the high 30%, or actually, I think it's sort of mid 30% range of faculty know about the tools, and that those faculty who do know about the tools and have used them are actually reporting a very high level of satisfaction and a willingness to continue with them. But as Kathy said, we also in the Every Learner network have produced, along with a contribution from Colorado State, an implementation guide. So it's really critical to not assume that if I just get you to pick a courseware, that you've bolted it on and it's going to make a difference. It is actually really important, and Rick, I think you were referring to this, is that implementation is really critical to think about thoughtfully, and it should not only be important to you and your students, you as faculty, but also it should be completely helpful to the students in their next level assessment. And I couldn't agree more about let's watch this and see if it does make a difference. In my world of educational technologies, we are super hopeful that once students have learned the practice of learning and they do it well, that this will continue on. But we don't have all of that evidence yet, and we're looking forward to finding some of that data in the future. So we're getting very close to completing our webinar, and I can't thank you both more than enough. I mean, it's just been terrific to have this time with you, because I know your fellow as provost will know giving up almost an hour and a half of your time is incredibly generous on your part. But I was wondering if you just wanted to say any last words, and then I do want to let the audience know this will be posted on the Every Learner website, and we'll be actually doing a summary of it and releasing that within hopefully a couple of weeks. So Kathy, since you started last the first time, we'll start first with you.
Yeah, the only thing that I would love to leave with that I don't think has been talked about much is the importance of having a communication strategy for supporting the rollout of this work. We don't have the time to do it, so it's important to pull in people who can lift up stories, communicate to faculty what this is and what it isn't. I think there's a great tendency to assume it means online education only. So just thinking really deeply about how and in what ways to communicate is really important.
Thanks,
yeah, I'd echo that for sure. I also wanted to just briefly mention, Kathy mentioned in the integration with the LMS, in her case, Canvas. We also have Canvas here. And I can tell you right away that a courseware which integrates with your LMS has a much higher chance of being adopted and actually used than ones that don't integrate with your LMS. So that's another sort of pro tip out there that when you're looking at various products to implement. We're very excited about digital learning and digital technologies and educational technologies here. I flushed out about $700,000 in the last 2 years and funding about 25 different projects all over the university, some of them using adaptive things, some of them creating all sorts of digital assets for their various courses. And the campus seems to be willing to roll up their sleeves and create things, adopt things, try things. And I think you'll find if you present it well and put in place the right incentives, faculty everywhere really want to understand the efficacy of these, because people are interested in helping students learn.
Yeah.
And we really feel like these tools can do that.
What a perfect way to end, and I just couldn't agree more. We really do think faculty are interested in student success, and we just need to find the tools that will help them actually continuously improve their courses, because we know both you as provost, both Every Learner and APLU, how valuable a college education is. And we want to make sure our students are successful when they have first experiences with it. So thank you both for being part of today's webinar. This was great fun. I know I get to see you both at some meetings, but I can't express my appreciation for just sharing with the rest of, quote unquote, the world, what it's like to actually lead some of these initiatives. So again, thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.